You called your cat's name. It was 3 feet away. You watched the ear rotate, just slightly, just enough, and then nothing. No turn of the head. No acknowledgement. The cat returned to whatever it was doing, which appeared, from every observable angle, to be absolutely nothing. Most owners land on the same explanation. Cats are aloof. It is just what they are. But behavioral researchers have spent decades studying exactly this moment. The moment after the ear moves and before the cat does anything. And what they have found does not match that explanation at all. There is one specific thing that happens inside a cat's brain during what looks like indifference. Something the research only recently captured clearly, and it reframes everything. We will get to it at the end. Once you understand it, you will not be able to look at that rotating ear the same way again. Start with the most basic assumption. Your cat did not hear you or heard you and registered nothing. In 2013, Atsuko Saito and Kazutaka Shinozuka at the University of Tokyo played recordings of the owner's voice calling the cat's name alongside recordings of strangers' voices for 20 cats and tracked the responses. The cats showed measurably greater orienting responses to their owner's voice, ear rotation, pupil dilation, head movement, than to the stranger's voice. The recognition was there. The physical evidence of it was there. What was absent was the visible behavioral response. The cats heard their owner, processed the signal as distinct and meaningful, and chose not to act on it. That is not a failure of perception. That is a brain that received a signal, identified it as meaningful, and elected not to produce a visible output. Hearing and responding are two separate processes in cats, and they can be completely decoupled. The reason that decoupling exists goes back much further than any individual cat. Domestic cats descend from Felis silvestris libica, the African wildcat, a solitary ambush predator that hunted alone and survived alone. In that context, visible response to any incoming stimulus was a liability. A predator that reacts to every sound announces its position. A predator that filters, processes internally, and responds only when it judges a response necessary lives longer. That behavioral architecture was not bred out during domestication, and there is genetic evidence for why. Researchers at Washington University School of Medicine, analyzing the genomes of domestic cats in 2014, found that while domestic cats carried genetic changes associated with reward learning and reduced fear of humans, the modifications governing social signaling and affiliative response are far less extensive than what occurred in dogs during their domestication. That distinction matters. Dogs were domesticated from pack animals for whom responding to the dominant individual was survival behavior. Every instinct selected for in a dog over thousands of years pointed towards social response. In cats, the selection pressure ran the other direction. Non-response was not a problem to be solved. It was an asset to be preserved. That is not aloofness. That is evolutionary logic that was never touched. What the evolutionary history does not fully resolve is whether any of this reflects the absence of genuine attachment, whether the indifference runs all the way down. In 2019, researchers at Oregon State University put 108 cats, kittens, and adults, and their owners through a secure base test adapted from the strange situation framework. Cats were placed in an unfamiliar room with their owner. The owner left, and then returned. Around 65% of the cats showed secure attachment. They used their owner as a base for exploration, ranged more freely when the owner was present, and settled faster after the owner's return. But here is what the study made clear. Secure attachment in cats did not produce enthusiastic greeting behavior. It produced proximity maintenance. The securely bonded cats stayed in the same space. They returned to the owner's vicinity. They were still. Think about that. The cat on the opposite end of the couch, appearing to have no interest in you whatsoever, may be doing precisely what a securely bonded cat does. Your presence is the entire point. The behavior just does not look like what most owners expect bonding to look like. The cats who showed the greatest security were not the ones who came running. They were the ones who simply remained near. Knowing the cat is bonded still leaves a question about what is happening internally during those long, still, apparently disengaged stretches. The external calm is not necessarily a readout of internal calm. Ethologist John Bradshaw, whose research at the University of Bristol on domestic cat cognition is documented in his 2013 work on the subject, describes cats as continuous environmental processors, a species that orients to its surroundings as a whole rather than treating humans as the primary information source. Cats are capable of maintaining complete behavioral stillness while carrying elevated physiological activation. Unlike dogs, which tend to externalize arousal through movement, panting, and vocalization, cats suppress outward expression as a default response to uncertainty. The stillness you observe is not evidence of a blank internal state. It is evidence of a species that evolved to keep its internal state invisible. What the cat is doing during that stillness is monitoring, and the monitoring system has access to a sensory range that makes your own look narrow. Cat hearing extends to approximately 79,000 Hz, and potentially as high as 85,000 Hz under laboratory conditions. The human ceiling is around 20,000. What your cat is processing while appearing to stare at nothing includes sounds that do not exist in your sensory world at all. Faint movements inside walls, vibrations from pipes, the acoustic signature of an insect crossing a ceiling. The cat that looks straight through you may not be ignoring you specifically. It may be attending to a dozen things at once, of which you are one. This also explains the inconsistency most owners find the most disorienting. The cat that ignores its name from across the room, but materializes the moment a cabinet opens. That is not randomness, and it is not a shift in mood. Cats habituate rapidly to familiar, repeated stimuli in predictable contexts. A signal that has been confirmed as non-threatening through hundreds of repetitions gets deprioritized by the nervous system. Your voice, calling the cat's name from the couch in the usual tone at the usual hour, has been assessed. It has been filed. The cabinet sound is novel, and novelty is exactly what the monitoring system is calibrated to catch. The cat is not choosing the cabinet over you. It is responding to the only signal in the environment its nervous system has not yet categorized. In its own way, that filing is a form of familiarity, the kind that only accumulates over time and repeated exposure. The pattern of responsiveness, once you understand what drives it, also becomes a diagnostic tool. A cat that has always been selectively responsive behaving that way is one thing. A cat whose responsiveness to familiar stimuli has measurably decreased over weeks. Less reaction to what used to draw its attention, more withdrawal from contact it previously tolerated, is something worth taking seriously. Veterinary behavioral literature identifies decreased engagement with familiar stimuli as a recognized early indicator of several medical conditions, including hyperthyroidism and age-related hearing loss, often appearing before other detectable physical symptoms. In older cats, it is also an early behavioral presentation of feline cognitive dysfunction, emerging as social withdrawal and reduced engagement with familiar stimuli well before more obvious cognitive signs develop. A shift in the pattern is the signal. The baseline pattern is not absence of bond, but deviation from it is the only language available to an animal that cannot tell you something is wrong. Which brings us back to what Saito and Shinozuka actually found. Not just the recognition, but what the data showed in the cats that appeared to do nothing at all. The researchers were not only tracking whether cats recognized their owner's voice, they were tracking what happened physically in the cats that produced no visible behavioral response. In those cats, the data told a different story entirely. Ear orientation shifted toward the sound source. Pupil dilation increased. Tail movement was recorded. These are involuntary responses. They happen below the threshold of behavioral decision. The cat's brain had already acted before the cat chose not to. Think about what that means. The cat that looked straight through you when you said its name was, at the neurological level, recognizing you specifically, distinguishing your voice from every other sound in its environment, and then suppressing the behavioral response. Not because the input was irrelevant, but because no action was required. The brain did not go quiet. Only the output did. Research on feline social cognition suggests this pattern is understood not as a marker of detachment, but as a marker of security. Cats in uncertain environments, cats who have not established safety with a person, cats carrying unresolved anxiety. These cats are more reactive, not less. The cat that filters your call from a position of complete stillness has already run the calculation. It knows you are there. It knows the space is stable. It has filed you as safe. And from where it is sitting, in the warmest patch of afternoon light it could find, that is the entire conclusion. No further response is necessary, because everything it needed to know, it already knows. The rotating ear was never nothing. It was the whole answer. If you want to understand what your cat is actually communicating when it does look at you, that slow, deliberate stare that holds just a few seconds longer than seems accidental, that is the next video, and the research behind it is stranger than you would expect.